In 2003, a gentleman by the name of Eugene Robinson was ordained a bishop in the Episcopal Church of America, and he was ordained up in New Hampshire. And this launched a real firestorm of debate within the church in regards to gays being involved with the ministry. And I remember several years after that event that one of my seminary professors said, right in class, he said, one of the fault lines within Christianity in America, within the Church of America, will fall with this whole business of this gay question. And it's really come to fruition because a poll taken by Pew Research this past summer illustrated the divide. 62% of the church in America side with the idea that gays should have a right to marry. They have a constitutional right to marry. 33% disagree with that. And so what we're talking about here is a real divide within the church. And just for clarity's sake, just so that everybody realizes and understands what I'm saying here, okay? When I refer to the church in this particular presentation, the church, it would represent the minority, the 33%. I offer that based upon the idea that the Free Methodist Church is a portion of that 33%. It's primarily evangelical. It's comprised of a lot of Pentecostals, Baptists, Methodists, so on and so forth, okay? So the church and the position of the church is based upon the idea of the authority of the Bible. It's a literal interpretation of the Bible. And we can see the church's position borne out by 3 points, if you will. In Leviticus 20:13, homosexual acts are described as despicable or detestable, excuse me. And the prescription in that verse is for death. Those who practice should be killed. Now, of course, we're not going to kill people, but on the flip side, there's a certain immoral aspect of homosexuality, and it's just borne out in the Bible, okay? The second issue involved with the opposition to gay marriage is from this idea of it degrading the institution of marriage. Jesus' own words in Mark's gospel in the 10th chapter illustrate this point, that where marriage is explained or expressed in terms of a man and a woman. Jesus said, therefore a man will leave his mother and father and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So it denigrates the institution of marriage when you allow homosexuals to marry, gays to marry. The third thing really runs into this idea of the byproduct of marriage. In Malachi 2:15, it expresses the idea of a byproduct of a marriage, a stable heterosexual marriage, being godly children. That's what God is really looking for, godly children. And so consequently, this is something that is really fostered by a stable heterosexual relationship, marriage. So with this in mind, these are three of the really important, most important arguments against gay marriage as proposed by the church. But they're all based upon the idea of a literal interpretation of the Bible. All right? Now, let's look at the state's argument, because the state looks at this whole business very differently. The state looks at it from the idea of human rights. From the perspective of human rights, it is a person's right to be able to marry somebody of their same sex. It's not hurting anybody else, so consequently it's a person's human right, and that fundamental right that a person has to do this, okay? So as far as this whole business of the state's position, 37 states before the 26th of June expressed the idea that this was legal in their state. The majority of states agreed with this point, that to legalize gay marriage. Now, on the 26th of June, the Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision that gay couples had a constitutional right to marry one another. All right? And 63% of Americans agree with this thing. I can't tell you the seismic shift that has taken place in the last 5 years. The 63% is from a CNN poll taken in summertime this year. 5 years ago, the same poll was taken, and it was 49% of Americans who believed that gay couples had a constitutional right. That was 5 years ago. We're talking about 14% shift. And really what I'm getting at is this. I'm getting at this point. America as we know it right now is post-Christian. Okay? The church argues from the perspective of the authority of the Bible. The Bible has authority in Christians' eyes. It's understood as authoritative. But that's not shared. It's not shared by many people in America. They look at the Bible and they see the Bible as being one offering in a buffet of philosophies, of buffet of truth. And people are able to pick and choose what they want, what they believe, what they think is right for them. So how do you influence people? When everybody has a right to their opinion and there's no truth with a capital T. You can't go on upon any authority. How do you influence people? Well, one of the great things about the Bible is that it offers entertainment in its stories, but it also offers education in the stories. There's tons and tons and tons of stories in the Bible. And one of the favorite stories, I don't know of yours, but certainly of mine, is the story of Daniel. Many believe that Daniel is all about this, this whole crazy, skilled dude who was able to do great things. But the story of Daniel really speaks to the idea of how godly people, how God's people can influence or be a countercultural influence within a dominant culture that isn't theirs. See, Daniel lived in Babylon. He lived in Babylon the vast majority of his life. And the Babylonians were a very different culture than his, the way he grew up as a Jew. We can see this whole business of how he influenced the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar in particular in the first chapter of the book of Daniel, okay? We're going to get into that in a second, but the first thing what I really want to do is I wanted to just introduce this whole thing by explaining to you the difference between Babylon and today. Because there's a lot of Christians who look at America today and they see the rise in gay marriage and all these things that run against their values, and they think that America's going to hell in a handbasket. I would suggest to you that it's far from the truth. There's a lot of people in America who are very, very, very good people trying to do the right thing. And I would submit to you, even those people who view gay marriage from the sense of a human right still are working on that premise, the basis of a human right. They're trying to be gracious to humans. Very different in Babylon, Daniel's age. In Babylon, it was gloves off. They were going after it. They were going exactly the opposite way of God. See, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians were all about worshiping their own gods. Marduk, Bel, Nebo, Baal. These are all Babylonian gods, but behind all of these gods was Satan. They were open Satan worshipers. There's a big difference between the two. Babylon was the worst of cultures that you could possibly have. Okay? So with that, let's read. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it, and the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his god in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his god. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing some aptitude for every kind of learning, and well-informed, quick to understand, qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. So for Daniel, 4 things took place. First of all, Daniel was kidnapped. He was kidnapped. He was part of the nobility in Jerusalem. In 587 BC, Jerusalem fell. And Daniel and a bunch of the other nobility in Jerusalem were taken in exile to Babylon. He was kidnapped. That was explicit in the text. What the next one is not quite so explicit. All right, he was castrated. Let me try to explain to you what the story is. Daniel was being trained to be an advisor to King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Now, when he's an advisor to King Nebuchadnezzar, he had access to the palace. Actually, he would have lived in the palace. But there were other people who lived in the palace as well, namely the wives and the concubines of King Nebuchadnezzar. The wives and the concubines of the harem Daniel would have some kind of access to them. Now, in order to make sure that his access didn't end up in hanky-panky, everybody in the way of a male persuasion was castrated to make sure that King Nebuchadnezzar's wives stayed faithful to him. The third thing that Daniel was forced to study the occult. The top line says the Ashpenaz, was to teach them, Daniel and his cohorts, the language and literature of the Babylonians. In essence, what was going on was this. The Babylonians wanted to have a brain drain of Yahweh in Daniel's mind, and to replace that with the Babylonian literature, which was all about astrology, was all about the conquest of Babylon, was all about the idea of the gods of Babylon. That was supposed to be inculcated into Daniel's mind. It was brainwashing in essence. And this really comes out based upon the fourth thing that Daniel had going on with him. His name was changed. Why is the name changed that big a deal? Because the name is a label. It describes who you are and what you're all about, your beliefs, who you're all about. Daniel in Hebrew means God is my judge. Yahweh is my judge. Okay? In Babylonian, Belshazzar means Bel, protect the king. Bel being the god of the Babylonians, protect the king. Big difference. Big difference. What the Babylonians were trying to do was they were trying to enculturate Daniel into their culture. They were trying to impose the Babylonian culture and mindset and faith system into Daniel's life. The one way, enculturation is one way. But Daniel responded in such a way as to proffer acculturation, two-way. And I would offer to you the idea that Daniel actually influenced Nebuchadnezzar in the Babylonian culture more than they influenced him. We'll see it in the next passage. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. He asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now, God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard, to whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed with this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked to them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service in every manner of wisdom and understanding, about which the king questioned them, and he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So, Daniel responded in 3 ways. The first way he responded was with hope. Daniel was in the dark dingweeds right here. But he responded in hope because Daniel came to understand that God, Yahweh, controlled those who were in control. It's important to keep that in mind. Yahweh controls those who are in control. Yahweh controlled Nebuchadnezzar, who was in control of Daniel. And that allowed him to have optimism because he understood that Yahweh's way was going to be the way that things go in the end. There was victory for God in the end. So he responded with hope. The second thing he responded was with humility. Humility. See, Daniel could serve, respect, and I submit to you, even care about those people who mocked him and his beliefs. Ashpenaz was supposed to teach the Babylonian culture, literature, what have you, language, to Daniel. And in the midst of the teaching, the education, I'm absolutely positive that Ashpenaz, along with Nebuchadnezzar and the other Babylonian officials, would have said to Daniel, Yahweh, what kind of God is Yahweh? Yahweh's no God. If Yahweh was such a great big God, why did the Babylonians kick your butt? What kind of God is that God? They'll let foreign powers kick your butt. You're supposed to be God's people. What's up with that? I am absolutely positive that Daniel met with no small amount of mocking as far as his beliefs. But in response to that, notice what Daniel did. Daniel served Nebuchadnezzar. He served him. And he respected what Nebuchadnezzar was all about. And I offer to you, he not only respected him, he actually cared for him. I say that because a little bit further on down the road as far as Daniel's story, in the 4th chapter, we have this very explicit statement from Daniel. 4:19 for those of you who like references. Let me try to set you up and give you a little bit of an idea as far as the context. Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. It's a weird and wild dream. Okay? This dream about there's this big tree, encompasses all the earth and everything like that, and there's this angel that comes down and clips the tree, knocks the tree off. I guess there's lumberjacks in heaven. Anyways, knocks the tree off. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar doesn't know what's up with this dream. He's vexed because he doesn't know what the dream's all about. So he goes to Daniel. Daniel's supposed to be the interpreter as far as dreams are concerned. That's what he's on the payroll for. So he goes to Daniel and he says to Daniel, tell me what this dream is all about, because this is really ticking me off. And Daniel's ruminating about the dream, and he comes to understand it's a judgment of God against Nebuchadnezzar. It's the judgment of Yahweh against Nebuchadnezzar in order to explain to Nebuchadnezzar that Yahweh controls him. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was the big guru. He was the kingpin. But Yahweh is the kingpin. And he's going to judge Nebuchadnezzar. So Daniel's about to interpret this to Nebuchadnezzar. And he says to Nebuchadnezzar, he begins with this, oh, how I wish this was upon your enemies and not you. He cared about Nebuchadnezzar. He cared about a king that mocked his beliefs. There was humility in what he did. Then the third thing he responded with was wisdom. Wisdom. You see, Daniel was able to pick and choose the fights that he fought. Notice he didn't fight about the name change. I'm sure he was offended. I'm absolutely positive he was offended. He didn't fight it. He didn't fight the curriculum. He did not fight the curriculum. It was about the occult. He was supposed to be the chief enchanter and magician. He was supposed to be the one who was leading this occult worship. He was first in his class. He didn't fight that. But what did he fight on? What was the plane he was fighting on? Every time he interpreted something for Nebuchadnezzar, he explained it was from Yahweh. He explained that all the benefits that Nebuchadnezzar would have would be from Yahweh. The Yahweh was actually for Nebuchadnezzar. He was for the Babylonian people. He wasn't against them. He utilized them, but he wasn't against them. As far as Yahweh is concerned, Yahweh's grace is ubiquitous. It's universal. It's throughout the whole world. That's what Daniel was really trying to get across. The idea of God's grace being available to Nebuchadnezzar. So those are the three things that Daniel responded. So how does that affect us? What does that look like in our situation? If we would just walk in hope, trusting that God's got to figure it out and he'll make it happen in his good time. And if we walk in humility, serve and really care for those who would mock our beliefs, and if we walk in wisdom, making sure that we're a witness, not necessarily a critic, we will eventually change our immediate world. And I think that's what God's got in mind. Change people's hearts and minds based upon his grace in their life that's offered to them. Won't you join me in prayer? Gracious God, I'm thankful that you have given us this Bible. It's inspired by your Spirit. It educates your people. I love the stories. Thank you. Thank you for the education that you offer. Father, I just pray that we might be like Daniel. I don't know if I'm ever going to be skilled with the interpretive powers of his, but on the other hand, I know your grace is available through me. I know your love can be expressed by me. I just pray that each one of us might be a conduit of your grace and your love to people who don't share our values, our beliefs. I just pray for this to be expressed so that your glory might be found in us. We might be a positive witness to a country that is moving away from you. Father, I pray for grace that we might be able to love the sinner while not being quite so excited about the sin. That we can change hearts and minds by that love that we offer. That our words might be wise, not just critical. Help us to do that, Lord, because it's a passion-filled topic. And there's a lot of righteous indignation that gets expressed, but it's not helpful. Help us to do that which you desire us to do, to be your witnesses, to be your glory and graciousness in a world that needs to know you. It's in the name of Jesus I pray. Amen.